This is the Two Marketeers podcast, where hosts and marketing experts Sean Patrick and Lindsay Waugh seek to uncover what makes brands so powerful in how they impact modern society and culture.
Two Marketeers. They've got a podcast. The Two Marketeers podcast.
Continuing our conversation about whether measuring effectiveness is killing creativity, Lindsay and I talk about how taking accountability for what motivates us has allowed us to thrive as creative thinkers in marketing. Here we go.
So what we were talking about was in those moments, sometimes you have to do what you have to save yourself, to rise above.
You have to save yourself first.
That's right. And that's a bit of like the freelance breaking of the handcuffs. If I can't thrive in this environment and I still love my job and I love what I do, how do I create my own environment where I am able to thrive, to rise up through my hierarchy of needs, to be able to get to a place where I can be my best creative thinker? And for us, I think it's been a lot of going out on our own, still working with and in the environments of the people that we love, but prioritizing our own needs in a different way so that we can feel like we can do our best work. And then Sean was saying over the last couple of years, it feels like everyone's gotten in the boat.
Everyone's stepping on our turf.
Everyone's on your ship and you're like, get out of here. Yeah. But it's true. It makes so much sense. Like, in order to get to your best self, you need to prioritize your own needs. And sometimes that means creating your own environment to thrive.
Yeah. It's kind of funny because to take that further, it's like even when I was reading the report and the report from work about creative effectiveness in marketing and building a culture around that, it's like, yeah, I knew that. I don't think I had a framework per se. Like Lindsay has said before, you just get more and more practice of figuring out which framework works best. And you're just kind of like, okay, let's do this. That's what we get to do when we decide, when we choose the things that motivate us. Everyone is motivated differently. You absolutely can be motivated by money, or your work can be everything about you, and that's where you're prideful. Mm-hmm. Except in the world full of alphas, it's very difficult for anyone who's not alpha to see what success can look like in other ways, where success doesn't involve competition. Success doesn't involve exhaustion. It's like, I think...
Is that an option? Where success doesn't involve exhaustion?
Yeah.
Okay. Work towards that. Write that down.
Next season,
be less exhausted.
The thing I want to jump to is the triad, going back to magic.
Yeah.
Right?
Sean sent me this banger of an article this morning and I was like, holy, this is going to be the thing.
Well, for me, it's really interesting because the way to price yourself well is to think of it as magic. Don't price the logic of how you do it. That's for you. You have to logically figure out the best way you do things. But that doesn't mean the people who buy it need to know all those details. Because like Lindsay said before, you never know. You never know what trick you're going to use. You never know when a particular experience that may have seemed like a waste of time at that time, all of a sudden is your best learning and totally applicable. You have to look at what you do when you're a creative thinker. You have to look at it as, think of it as magic. And all of a sudden, it can't be priced simply by hours at a rate within a certain time frame. But remember that if you do your best work and you keep trying to do it better, it should be magic. It should feel like magic. And the article that I found is on LinkedIn. We'll add the link to the notes. And the title is Unlocking the Magic, the triad of expertise, motivation, and creative thinking in the creative process. Boom.
Yeah.
So from a creative standpoint, how you unlock that magic, they refer to the triad of expertise, motivation, and creative thinking in the creative process.
Yeah.
And it's about how each individual combines the talents and skills, the stuff that comes naturally, the stuff they enjoy doing, the stuff they are good at. But then there's also but then there has to be that positive motivation. And usually that motivation is just solving the problem itself,
Yeah.
right? That's your motivation. And then understanding that you're not paid to do, you're actually paid to think. That's where the magic happens, because people can see what you do. They can't see what you think. And of course, the thinking drives better doing. So, I mean, I'm getting really deep here, but I think it's about the magic is gone. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And when I read this stuff, I feel very unmotivated, because that was never figuring out frameworks and testing everything and constantly trying to emulate success that others have done and collecting that data is not exciting for people who want to create magic.
Yeah. I think the key thing in the triad is, for me, that people try to point to one thing when it comes to the magic. Like, how do you get there? A few years ago, it was when it was like COVID, and it was like, well, it must be collaboration. Collaboration's the magic, because now we're not collaborating. So
Yeah.
it's got to be that. And then it was like, we just need fresh thinking, younger talent. So it's got to be younger people. That's what gets to better creative thinking. I think the interesting thing about this triad is that it's the combination and unique combinations of multiple things. I think even when you think now about AI, it's like, okay, the idea is that if I, as a computer, can go study all of the people who were once artists, as an example, Van Gogh and all of the people, take what they know and their process of what they do, and now me as a computer can spit out beautiful art because I've now just learned the stuff from what those people learned. Correct. It's like, it's not that one thing. It's not just learning and process. I think the interesting thing about this triad is the things that they've decided to pull together. So, like, expertise being one of them. They say that you need to have such a level of knowledge within a certain area to be able to innovate creatively. Right. So it's like, new people may be able to bring like fresh thinking to it, but the depth of knowledge and experience is really, really valuable in coming up with what's uniquely next, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think that's the discipline aspect that we've often talked about, right? Like, enough hours of doing something hard enough, you get better and better. It's the muscle part, right? That's where it's hard, but you love to do it and you know it'll make you better. That's what I think the expertise is, the aspect of it.
Yeah. And then the other, like that other part they were talking about, which is the creative thinking skills. We're obsessed with this. We've talked about this, even though we haven't necessarily known to call it that exactly, but they say specifically that creative thinking skills are not innate, that they're developed through practice and training. And also that creative thinking skills are not only about thinking creatively, but how to figure out how to select the best solution or idea, and analyzing and evaluating the strengths and the weaknesses of arguments, of options, of all of that. And I think a lot of people find themselves in roles responsible for evaluating creative who haven't taken the time to learn the creative thinking skills that they just think are like, it's a gut, it's a feeling, like I have an intuition that this is going to be the best thing. But knowing that those skills on evaluating creativity can be learned is a huge thing. I think a lot of people just think it's like, I'm creative or I'm not.
Well, I want to call that out because, Lindsay, you've said this a few times, and it was so insightful when you said it, is you think one of the biggest things lacking in specifically the marketing industry as it comes to creative is it doesn't seem to be a practice or discipline that is taught.
Yes.
Right? And I'm telling you are so right. It is absolutely learned. I can tell you as a born creative, I put no thought for the first 20 years I was a creative, meaning like from the age of 1 to 20, no thought to things. I really just wanted to create great stuff. And I went right to whatever it was I wanted to make and I made it. And then over the last 30 years, I've had to deprogram myself to say, whatever it is I make will be a waste of my time if I don't think about why I want to make it or what it's
Yeah.
supposed to do when it's done. I think that's why the design and design is such an excellent to me, it's the discipline that best illustrates how you do that. Being a great designer doesn't mean you then know how to evaluate. That's the thing I had to learn, because when we would talk about early critiques and go like, I went into this class thinking I was going to kill it and I got killed, right? It's that humbling. The skill and understanding all the facets of creativity and how everyone has an opportunity to be creative, but recognize, like Lindsay said, it's not you have it or you don't. It's what kind of creativity do you want to have and how do you use it to be better?
Yeah.
It's not a wall, creative, non-creative.
Yeah.
And I think that's the wall we're seeing, where there are people on my turf telling me that if you don't have all this data, I think it's like, listen, that's always helpful. More information is always great, but I feel like there's this false belief that data tells us the truth.
And everything that we need to know about how to succeed.
Yes.
Yeah.
We're lazy.
I mean, and then the third element, so if we're kind of talking about that triad, the third element is that motivation. So you have the expertise, creative thinking skills, and then the motivation, which you already spoke about. But I think the one thing that really jumped out at me from this conversation was that it says motivation is essential for creativity because it fuels the willingness to take risks, explore new possibilities, and persist in facing obstacles. It feels like when we're so obsessed with analyzing creative effectiveness that we no longer have the time or space to take risks, explore new possibilities, do things that don't work, and then face those obstacles. Like, we're under such a time, money, and like technology crunch that it's like we don't have the freedom to do those things and to be motivated by like failure and new possibilities and all of that. There just doesn't feel like the time to fail and to iterate, which is what you're talking about with design thinking. It feels like in a short period of time, we need to use the frameworks that we have to get it perfectly right and execute short-term campaigns and short-term ideas and measure them quickly and have them succeed and move forward quickly without any sort of nuance or longevity around creativity, especially in marketing and advertising.
Yeah.
So it's like, where does that motivation and then self-fulfillment come from if we're in this like short-term pinched environment? Yeah.
And I think, if I may speculate, because that is my
That's
struggle.
all we're here to do, really.
Okay, great. It's up to creatives to change that. It's up to the people who are willing to take the risk, call themselves creative, give themselves that time, because they make the decision that they want to do great work and they want to be motivated again. So there's just this, you and I faced this yesterday, and it's like, what's the world going to do? Listen, get off my boat or stay on it, but fasten your seatbelt.
Or grab a paddle and start paddling.
Right? It's like when you take on the responsibility of creatively solving problems and be the one seen as responsible for that, you need to recognize that you are the courageous one. You're the one who should lead in your own decisions. And I think, coming back to it, I think what's happening is there's this environment, there's this survival-based environment of people who don't see that. They don't seek that. They don't see that as a motivation. That's fine. But it's emotional. I think the first thing we have to do is remember why we do what we do and recognize when it's not making us better, when it's not fulfilling us. And I think if, human creatives, I know that sounds like redundant, but it's up to us to protect what is being threateningly taken away, which is time to do our jobs well, reward in the ways we need to be rewarded.
Yeah, I think it's really interesting to watch your motivations evolve over time as well. I
Yes.
think when, your motivations in your 20s are different than your motivations in your 30s, which are different than your motivations in your 40s, and that's a natural progression. I think what I've now learned is that when you start to feel unfulfilled and you don't know why, like revisit your motivations, because I think what was driving you at the time may no longer be driving you. And you may not
Correct.
even know that. I think I didn't even know that really. And then I revisited the Maslow hierarchy of needs yesterday because you were talking about it. I was like, to be honest, I haven't looked at it in so long. But I saw the progression and the moments when I got bored and being uncomfortable and lacking motivation. And when I then progressed to the next thing, I felt reinvigorated, and I could almost like see that my timeline unfolding in the pyramid itself, which I was like, that's pretty cool. I didn't really
Yeah.
know that, I am deeply motivated by doing something different, by trying new things, by failing, and the fear of failure motivates me a lot, like whether that's good or bad.
Mm-hmm.
And success means more to me now when I've done things on my own than it did then when I was kind of part of a bigger machine, getting the prestige and the reward and the recognition. I don't need that anymore. So I think it's kind of like those triggers of when you're feeling unfulfilled, to revisit that and rediscover what your next motivation or what your current motivation is and what you can do to help yourself get there.
Yeah, I think a good point in that, Lindsay, is how you said it just isn't, and we forget, this isn't one long progression to the top of the
Yeah.
pyramid. This is up and down. And to Lindsay's point, think about how you're feeling and remember those times that you truly felt like you were thriving. And it could have been 25 years ago when you were doing something completely different, but those are the things that really help us get out of our heads and think about
Yeah.
what that feeling of thriving is. Absolute happiness, right? And those are the things, like Lindsay said, sometimes you can't work 80 hours a week anymore because of your lifestyle. Sometimes shit happens that make your priorities shift. But what you have to remember is, like I said, creativity is an emotion, and tap into that. And remember the times you felt most creative, and they're likely times that you can identify the things you were doing, things that made you happy, and what were those things, and do those things apply now?
Yeah. And I think our collective perspective, you can correct me if I'm wrong, is that when you think about developing the most effective creative, it comes out of the environments when those people are thriving and when they're in those self-actualization, I suppose, environments.
Yep.
And that will drive effectiveness, like creative coming out of that mindset and that state and that environment will be more effective, like whether you try to put guardrails and frameworks and rules behind it or not.
Right.
And we do think that creativity does drive effectiveness, optimal creativity.
It's about self, right? Imagine using the creative effective ladder on yourself and to be like, what's the stuff that sustains? What's the stuff that changes performance? What is that performance? And that performance, when it comes to thriving, is things like being happier, feeling energized, feeling fulfilled. So I think it's a good boat to be on, and anyone is welcome. But this is deep. We said it yesterday. I was like, we just did something. Lindsay said, we just did something fun. I said, I think we need to get back into the psychology because that's what gets us going.
Yeah, it's true.
Hopefully this was helpful. This morning I came out of the house and went like, God, I just feel so different because I just faced this sort of vulnerability I was feeling of like, God, my boat is sinking. There's too many people on it. And now I'm kind of like, new boat.
Maybe it's just because we need a yacht. Maybe we need a bigger boat.
Bigger
with
boat.
mimosas.
I like it. The art of visualization.
Maybe we need to change our boat.
Everyone, Marketeers, I hope you found this helpful. Be your own motivator and don't let some of that shit that the people who are jumping on your boat who don't belong there, don't make that sink your boat. Find your motivation.
That's right. I love that. I love that.
Have a great week.
You
Bye,
too. Have a great
Marketeers.
week, everyone. Bye.
Thanks for listening to the Two Marketeers podcast. New episodes launch every 2 weeks.
Find the Two Marketeers podcast on Apple Podcasts, Amazon Music, or wherever you like to listen. And be sure to rate and subscribe.
Listen on our website, thetwomarketeers.ca, or you can ask Alexa to play the Two Marketeers podcast.
Want to keep in touch? Follow the Two Marketeers on LinkedIn or at Two Marketeers on TikTok. We've always got something to share.
This podcast is over.